For 18 years, a man woke up every morning and went to work like any normal person. He shook hands, built friendships, and attended classified government meetings. He traveled with the Chancellor and handled letters exchanged between world leaders. But every single night, he reported everything back to the enemy. He wasn't discovered for nearly 2 decades, and by the time anyone figured it out, he was already sitting 3 feet away from the most powerful man in West Germany. Let's talk about a specific morning in the spring of 1974. It's 6:32 a.m., a neighborhood in Bonn, West Germany, the kind of quiet street where nothing happens. A couple is asleep in their apartment. Then the knock comes. Not a polite knock, the kind of knock you never forget. Within minutes, both of them are in handcuffs. The man being arrested looks at the officers around him. He doesn't break down. He doesn't beg. He doesn't even pretend to be confused. He straightens up and says calmly and clearly, "I am a citizen and officer of the German Democratic Republic." That sentence will shake the entire Western world. To understand why, we need to go back. Not to that morning, but to a city in ruins. Berlin, 1927. The Great Depression has gutted Germany. A pianist who used to play music behind silent films has just lost his income because the movie industry switched to sound. His wife is a hairdresser. Together they're barely keeping the lights on. And in the middle of all of this, their only son is born. His name is Gunter. Gunter Guillaume grew up watching the world collapse and rebuild around him. He lived through World War II in Berlin, watched the city get bombed into rubble, watched Germany get carved into 2 separate countries by the people who won. By the time he was in his 20s, he was living in the eastern half, communist-controlled East Germany, and working as a photographer for a publishing house. Unremarkable, anonymous. The kind of person nobody looks twice at, which is exactly why the Stasi noticed him. The Stasi, East Germany's secret police, wasn't just an intelligence agency. It was one of the most sophisticated surveillance operations in human history. And running its foreign espionage division was a man who had turned spy recruitment into something closer to an art form. His name was Markus Wolf. He had a knack for finding ordinary people and turning them into extraordinary weapons, specifically because nobody would ever suspect them. Wolf's approach was different from most Cold War spy operations. Instead of sending trained agents who looked like spies, he sent people who looked like neighbors, office workers, party volunteers, people you'd trust because they were just there, every day, doing normal things. Gunter fit that profile perfectly. Around 1950, Gunter met a woman named Crystal. They got engaged fast, married within a year. What the outside world didn't know was that Crystal was already connected to the Stasi, and soon so was Gunter. The two of them began receiving training from the HVA, the Stasi's foreign intelligence arm, not weapons training, not field combat, the kind of training that teaches you how to build a fake life so thoroughly that even you start believing it. The mission they were given was enormous in ambition and almost absurd in its patience. They were to cross into West Germany, pretend to be refugees fleeing communism, and slowly, over years, possibly decades, work their way into the West German political system. Specifically, into the Social Democratic Party, which was rising in influence and would eventually control the government. There was no deadline, no rush. Just get in, get trusted, and wait. In 1956, Gunter and Crystal Guillaume, along with Crystal's mother, crossed into West Germany. They arrived in Frankfurt, and they started building a life that wasn't theirs. The first thing they did was smart. They didn't go to a refugee processing center. That would mean paperwork, interviews, background checks. Instead, they walked into a local police station, a much more casual registration, where Crystal's mother, who conveniently held a Dutch passport, vouched for them both. No deep vetting, no suspicion. Just 3 people starting over. To look like they were building a real life, they opened a cafe right next to the Frankfurt Cathedral. They named it after Crystal's stepfather's surname, Boom. Locals wandered in, had coffee, made small talk with the couple behind the counter. Gunter was warm, attentive, curious about people. He remembered names. He asked about your family. He was, by all accounts, genuinely likable. But every evening, when the cafe closed, Gunter was listening to Stasi shortwave radio transmissions. Coded messages beamed from East Berlin, giving him instructions. In 1957, the instruction came: join the SPD. He did. He started writing for the party's newspaper. Then he became a paid district secretary. Then, and this is where his real talent showed, he got elected to the Frankfurt City Council in 1968. He hadn't just infiltrated a political party. He had become a legitimate, respected political figure within it. People liked him. People vouched for him. Meanwhile, Christel was building her own track record. She landed a job managing the office of a senior SPD official who was simultaneously a member of the Bundestag, the European Parliament, and the board of a major public broadcaster. Through her boss, she even got access to NATO military documents, information she passed to Gunter, who passed it back to East Berlin. Here's what makes this especially remarkable. West German intelligence had actually flagged Gunter as a potential Stasi agent as early as 1955, even before he'd crossed the border. When he was later considered for a job inside the Federal Chancellery in 1969, that old report resurfaced. Officials were warned, and yet the concern was dismissed. An interrogation was conducted. One official walked away describing Gunter as making a self-confident and relaxed impression, with nothing to justify the suspicion. That's the thing about a great cover. It doesn't just fool strangers. It fools people who are specifically looking for cracks. Through his work managing the election campaign of a politician who later became West Germany's defense minister, Gunter finally got what he'd been working toward for 13 years. In 1969, the same year the SPD took power in Bonn, he was brought into the Federal Chancellery as a junior desk officer, initially handling trade union affairs. He was inside, not at the top yet, but inside. And in the world of espionage, getting inside is the hardest part. After that, it's just a matter of time. 3 years after entering the Chancellery, Gunter Guillaume was promoted, not just to a better desk. He became one of 3 personal assistants to Willy Brandt, the Chancellor of West Germany, a Nobel Peace Prize winner, one of the most consequential political figures in post-war Europe. To appreciate what this meant, Brandt was the architect of what was called Ostpolitik, a bold, controversial policy of normalizing West Germany's relationship with the Communist East, with Poland, with the Soviet Union. It was changing the temperature of the entire Cold War, and East Germany desperately wanted to know, was it real or was it a trap? Gunter Guillaume was now in a position to answer that question directly. He sat in Brandt's outer office. He handled the Chancellor's correspondence. He traveled with him on official trips. He was present at private dinners, informal conversations, moments when a head of government lets his guard down. He read letters exchanged between Brandt and U.S. President Richard Nixon. He had access to documents outlining NATO's nuclear strategy and West Germany's negotiating positions with Eastern Bloc countries. He filed 23 reports back to East Berlin between 1969 and his arrest. But then, ironically, the thing that started unraveling everything wasn't a mistake he made. It was a mistake the Stasi had made almost 2 decades earlier. Back when the Guillaumes first arrived in West Germany in 1956, the HVA occasionally sent them radio messages. Not intelligence instructions. Personal ones. Birthday greetings. Congratulations on milestones. The kind of thing you'd send to an agent far from home to remind them they hadn't been forgotten. West German intelligence had intercepted and archived those messages without fully understanding them. Then, in early 1973, an investigator named Heinrich Schorregger was working on 3 separate espionage cases and noticed a pattern. The same lawyer had helped multiple East German agents relocate to West Germany, and that same lawyer had handled the Guillaume family's immigration paperwork in 1956. The old radio intercepts were pulled back out. The birthday messages were decoded. The congratulations on the birth of his son Pierre. The greetings to Georg, Gunter's cover name. It all pointed in one direction. Surveillance began immediately. Wiretaps, tails, monitoring of his communications. By 1973, West German intelligence was almost certain. Here is where the story takes its strangest turn. The head of West Germany's domestic intelligence service went to Chancellor Brandt personally and told him, Your personal assistant is almost certainly a Stasi spy. Brandt was asked to do something extraordinary, to act completely normal. Keep Guillaume close. Let the surveillance continue. Don't tip him off. And so Brandt, one of the most powerful men in Europe, continued going to work every morning with a spy reading his mail. He even took a private vacation, with Guillaume in attendance. Whatever Guillaume saw or learned during that vacation was relayed back to East Berlin. The Guillaumes, for their part, had sensed something was off. The Stasi told them to stop active intelligence work and gave them a choice: leave now for East Germany or stay and ride it out. They chose to stay. That choice would seal everything. April 24th, 1974, 6:32 in the morning. West German officers knocked on the door of a quiet apartment in Bad Godesberg, just outside Bonn. The operation was called Tango. Gunter and Christel Guillaume were arrested without incident, and then Gunter said those words: "I am a citizen and officer of the German Democratic Republic. Not ashamed, not afraid, proud." 13 days later, Willy Brandt resigned. He didn't have to. Legally, nothing tied him to any wrongdoing. But the political embarrassment was devastating. A spy had been inside his own office for years. The man responsible for normalizing East-West relations had been penetrated by the East. Brandt himself later said he had simply been exhausted, worn down by personal scandals, a struggling economy, and the pressures of the job. The Guillaume affair was the final weight that tipped the scale. As he put it in his memoirs, reflecting on Guillaume, "Not for the first time, I had overestimated my knowledge of human nature." At trial in December 1975, Gunter was sentenced to 13 years in prison for treason. Christel received 8. They served separately. Christel was exchanged for 6 Western spies in March 1981 and returned to East Germany. Gunter followed in October that same year as part of another prisoner swap. Back in East Germany, the government treated him like a war hero. He received the Order of Karl Marx, the country's highest civilian honor. He was given a job training the next generation of Stasi agents. In 1988, he published his autobiography. But the personal cost was steep. Christel divorced him almost immediately after their return. She was furious, not just because he had confessed upon arrest when she had not, but because the trial revealed he had been a member of the Nazi Party in his younger years, something she had never known. She refused to speak to him again. Then came the irony that intelligence historians still talk about. Markus Wolf, the spy master who had overseen the entire Guillaume operation, publicly admitted after German reunification that Brandt's fall had never been the goal. It had been an accident, a catastrophic one, because Brandt's Ostpolitik was exactly what East Germany had wanted to see succeed. His warm approach to the East was creating space for dialogue, for family reunifications, for a softer Cold War. When Guillaume's exposure forced Brandt out, his replacement shifted the SPD back toward a harder line. The Stasi's greatest intelligence victory had accidentally destroyed the one Western politician most useful to their own interests. Wolf called it one of the biggest mistakes in the history of East German espionage. After reunification, the German government granted Guillaume full immunity from any further prosecution. He was called to testify in Markus Wolf's treason trial in 1993, but told the court he could barely remember the events of 40 years ago, referring every question to his autobiography. He died on April 10, 1995, of a heart attack in a small town near Berlin. Christel followed 9 years later. The most lasting reminder of the Guillaume affair isn't a plaque or a museum exhibit. It's a book written by their son Pierre, titled The Foreign Father. Pierre was born in West Germany while his parents were undercover. He grew up believing his family was one thing. The reality was something else entirely. In 2004, a documentary brought together Pierre Guillaume and Matthias Brandt, son of the Chancellor his father helped destroy, to talk about what it was like growing up in the shadow of their parents' choices. Two sons on opposite sides of the same story, trying to make sense of the same broken years. Some Cold War stories are about ideology, some are about power. This one is about how far a man will go when he genuinely believes in what he's doing, and how much can go wrong for everyone when he succeeds.